Greetings all. I've been asked a number of times over the years how to begin a relationship with God. There are quite a few of us who have pretty strong opinions about which way it is to God, and I'm going to address that today. I want to read a few verses from the 9th chapter of John's Gospel. This is a story with which you'll be familiar. It begins in verse 1, and it says, "As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was blind?' And Jesus answered, 'Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's work might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world.' And when he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, 'Go, wash in the pool of Siloam,' which means sin. And then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, 'Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?' And some were saying, 'It is he.' But others were saying, 'No, but it is someone who looks like him.' He kept saying, 'I am the man.' But they kept asking him, 'Then how were your eyes opened?' He answered, 'The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, "Go to Siloam and wash." And then I went and washed and received my sight.'" I went and washed and received my sight. Every pastor finds him or herself teaching a class or church membership class. I've taught one of those every year of my full-time ministry, I suppose. And during that time, a number of questions are raised. They're not always raised by students. If it's a confirmation class, they are usually sixth graders or so. If it is an adult membership class, they can be of any age. But a lot of questions are asked. And most of them revolve around our Christian experience. And it seems like when I hear those questions, it raises one of my own. And it has to do with our Christian commitment. There are many people in the church today who simply don't understand the idea of Christian experience. Some feel that they're in the church under false pretenses, I think. And the reason they feel that way is because they've never been able to point to a time and to a place that's very precise when they had a Christian experience that came into their lives. Others of us in the church have had conversion experiences years ago, but it seems like nothing has changed very much in our faith since then. Some of us joined the church under the urging of parents, and we've been members of the church for years and years and years, and there just doesn't seem to be a lot of joy in our Christian experience. I think it's true to say some church members are bored with the church. They often express how they get more out of their service club rather than their religious fellowship. There are those in the church today who feel dispirited in their own religion, and they point to someone and they say, well, look at Mrs. Jones, or look at Mr. Jones. What a radiant Christian. And so they conclude that something must be wrong with my experience, because I don't feel the way Mrs. Jones seems to feel. So in our honest moments, most of us have had feelings along these lines when it comes to our own personal Christian experience. Or at the very least, we have wondered where we stood in our relationship with God based on our Christian experience. All of us have seen the necessity to grow in the experience that we have had. So, which way is it to God? How do we, through life and through a Christian experience, draw closer to God? Now, the Christian life seems, well, maybe the right word is assumes, that there has been a Christian experience, that we have gone through conversion, that we have experienced new birth. A lot of terms are used to describe that we have professed our faith, or that we have been saved. But what I want us to see this morning is that there are various approaches to God. And so it's important that we understand our Christian experience, and that Christian experience is one that begins a lifelong experience, but one that is or involves continual growth. I was reading a devotion one time. It was about a conversation that involved several persons. One was saying, "But I tell you for a fact, Jesus gives sight by means of spitting onto the ground, making clay, putting that on the blind man's eyes, and then making him wash in the pool. All these ingredients, especially getting into the pool, are required. It's the only way." "You're all wet," responds a second fellow this devotion. He had a friend there who backed him up too. "Two things only are needed. You must believe, and you must permit Christ to touch you. Without the touch," as this conversation went on, "you cannot be made whole. Water's not the thing, the touch is." And as the conversation got to that point, his friend nodded agreement. Still another true believer spoke up. "Water," he says, "is necessary. But I don't understand this single touch idea. When the Lord first touches your eyes with the saliva, you can only see as through a mirror dimly. You can't see clearly. It's like people look like walking trees. But then he touches you again, and that's when your vision becomes sharp and clear. It's the second touch. That's what does it." Now, the last member of this little sidewalk session spoke. "I cannot for the life of me understand this stress on procedures and water and touching. I simply called out my need, and Jesus made me whole, declaring, 'Your faith has cured you.' Faith alone, that's all that is necessary." Now, when I read that devotion, and the reason I share it with you is that it seems to me that what each person in this conversation was affirming was a very important, indisputable fact that through the Christ, though once they were blind, now they could see. But each had come to Christ in a very different way. The Bible clearly teaches there is more than one way to God. Perhaps the better word is approach to God. There are many ways. There are many approaches. And some of them overlap. Any dynamic Christian experience of maturity might include several elements. For example, emotion might precede an intellectual decision. Emotion might accompany an intellectual decision. An intellectual faith will seldom be without feeling or without emotion. I know that when I had my first Christian experience, I was a very young teenager, and I responded to a sermon that was filled with fear. It was the beginning of my Christian experience. It was not the only one, and it was not the totality of my Christian experience. But what I'm trying to say today is that God works in many ways. God takes us where we are. God calls on us to grow our own experience. God challenges us, I think, to enlarge our vision from time to time. Challenges us to look at our faith, examine it. When I was really active in the Arkansas Conference, there were two people who were serving full-time pastorates in the Arkansas Conference, and both had served as Navy chaplains. And I happened to be pretty close friends with each of them. And I once heard one of them say, I saw a variety of religious approaches in the Christian faith, and I saw it demonstrated each Sunday. Now, it happened to be that this was a man, and he was responsible, not the only one, but one of those who was responsible for Sunday morning worship. And he went on to describe, saying, often we would begin the Sabbath with a ritualistic communion service for the Anglo-Catholic brethren and sisters, and then one or two typical Sunday morning services of a what he described as a general Protestant type in a formal setting. At noon, perhaps a service in the brig. In the afternoon, open field services off the back of a jeep. And then in the evening, there almost always was some kind of evangelical or evangelistic service in the chapel. Now here's what he said. In none of these did I believe that God was dead or present. Indeed, it was only as I stood at the end of the day and looked back over them all did I feel that I had seen Christian experience in its richest and in its fullest sense. In all of these, each and every one, I could see God at work in various ways. I love how he shared that experience with us. The life of John Wesley dramatizes much of what I'm trying to say this morning. Wesley was a young Anglican priest, you will recall with me. He was one of the most brilliant minds of the entire 18th century. He was a teacher at Oxford University, and he was very committed to the church. We know that his intellectual faith, however, did not satisfy him. So later in life at Aldersgate, he had a Christian experience, and he later described it as having his heart strangely warmed. It was an emotional conversion. And it was this emotional conversion under his intellectual commitment that sent him to turn England upside down for the sake of Christ. We sometimes think that that concludes the story. It does not. Because back of Wesley, the beginning of his life and his formative years, was the little parsonage at Epworth, and there was the role of his mother, who was a wonderful Christian mother, Susanna. She raised, and I really don't remember how many children. 9 comes to mind, but that may not be accurate. And she found time to spend an hour a week with each of her children concerning religious matters, concerning their faith development. And it's that religious influence that impacted John Wesley. And it had an impact all of his life, not only during the learning phase, not only during the educational phase, not only during the teaching phase, but all of his life. After the merging of all of these things, every aspect of faith, Wesley could later say of his religious experience the same thing that Paul said: "It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." Turning to the New Testament, there is Abraham's first Christian experience. It came in the form of a dream. It led eventually to a covenant with God. There was Moses, who experienced God in a burning bush. Turning to the New Testament, Simon and Andrew and James and John, they were merely confronted with these words: "Follow me." It was their Christian experience. It was the beginning of their walk of faith. Now, we all remember Paul's conversion experience. It was emotional. It was dramatic. That of the Ethiopian eunuch that's told to us in the 8th chapter of the book of Acts was quiet and simple. Just a few of the people who share or for whom the Bible tells their religious experience. So here's my question, and I'm at the end. Why so many ways to God? Is it accurate that there are many ways to God? Well, the answer is quite simple. The reason there are so many ways to God is that we were each created different. Our experiences are not alike, just as our physical appearance isn't alike. Our voices aren't alike. And guess what? It will come as a surprise to hear me say this, I'm sure. We have varied thoughts and ideas. Our values and our beliefs, they aren't 100% the same. However, there is one thing that we do share in common, and that is our need to be reconciled with our very Creator. We have a need, a very big need, to enter into a relationship with God. And we enter into that relationship based on where we are in life, where we are with ourselves, where we are with the world, where we are with God. I wish for you in these very difficult times a sense of security about your Christian experience. As I shared in the very beginning of this sermon, so many people feel so insecure and they look at someone else's experience and they think it's superior. It's not. We come to God at different times in our lives, in different ways. But the way you came to God is vitally important. Cherish it. And make sure that you do everything you can for it to grow. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, bow with me, please. God, thank you for your love shown in the most understandable way to each of us through your Son, Jesus Christ. Through Christ, we come to you. For some of us, it may be more intellectual than emotional. For some of us, it may be more emotional than intellectual. The important thing is that Christ died for us, each of us. And there is an avenue for us to grow in our relationship with you. During this time when we cannot meet for worship, God, guide us that we might grow in that relationship. Hear our prayer fully. Amen.